Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I do hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am an author, and I'd like to welcome you to another Storytime Thursday, where I'm going to be continuing reading my first book, The Shadow of the Past, available on Amazon. I'm going to be reading chapter 4 today. So grab yourself some coffee or a tea or something and settle in and enjoy. All right. Chapter 4, Beyond the Verge. Valinar woke before dawn after a visionless sleep, his first in weeks, and made ready to leave. He put on a pair of thick pants and a jerkin, both colored dark green. Over his tunic, he put on a thick vest of leather armor. He placed the thick brown boots he had worn in his trek into the deep woods upon his feet and placed the merit arm guards upon his arms. He buckled a belt around his waist, to which he fixed his knife and a small bag of gold which his father had given him. He strapped his selkir to his back and fastened his thick brown hooded cloak to his neck with a green clasp. Lastly, he listed the pack with his provisions and supplies onto his back and left his room. He made his way to the north gate of Gyrotha. When he arrived, he found a small crowd of elves about the open gate, intent upon wishing him farewell and good luck. After taking a final leave of his father and brother, he passed through the gate and set off towards the Shaddai plain. Valinar reached the soft rolling hills of yellow grass that characterized the Shaddai plain at midday. His keen eyes could see far into the distance, dotted with the occasional tree or rock, and lines with many a small stream or valley, but that was only a small section of the great plain. Valinar had long studied any maps brought by traders and emissaries and was familiar with his layouts. The Shaddai Plains ran from the Haltar ridges in the west all the way to the highlands which bordered the Sea of Rhinal in the east. The plain was bordered to the north by the Orthrus Mountains, which ran from the crashing sea to the west of the Haltar ridges to nearly the halfway point of Shaddai, which were separated by the Great Valley from the Dresh Mountains, which ran more than half the remaining distance to the highlands before they curved northward, and the Eltanar forests made up the rest of the northern border. To the south, running west to east, the plain was bordered by the wide, shallow valley between the Haltar ridges and the Taranu forest, then the forest itself, followed by the Bay of Vernas, and finally the Jargai Riverlands. A merchant had once told him that it would take 80 days to cross the length of the plains and 20 days to cross its width at its broadest point, if one traveled swiftly. The plains had long been inhabited, though never heavily. Its grass good for grazing, and the land around the various rivers that cut through it was good farming. In recent centuries, the entirety of the Shaddai had been claimed by the kingdom of Kamral, although many who lived there did not recognize their rule. In fact, the only sign of their control in recent years was the small garrison they kept at Balth, a fort built by the Dark Elves on the first of the Halter Ridges, and their rule of the trading city of Fetra, which sat nearly due north of Gyrotha. The east, much nearer the Cameralian heartland of the Riverlands, was dominated by the fortresses of Cluin and Takarin, which had for several hundred years been the capital of Cameral, which lay on the edges of the Jargai Riverlands and the Eltanar Forest, respectively. The plain was dotted with a large number of smaller settlements, the population consisting primarily of humans. Valinar did not stop to rest until well after nightfall. He lit a small fire and ate a small portion of the dried meat and a few hard cakes, and drank a small amount of water before settling down to sleep. He had a further vision of the dark plain, definitely not Shaddai, which the mysterious scar, and awoke shortly before dawn to set off towards Fetra. As he walked, he paid little attention to his surroundings, which were largely just grass and softly rolling hills, with long, flat stretches and sun valleys, and was lost in his own thoughts. There had never been any settlements, at least none of any size, between the forest and Fetra. As he walked on, he caught the occasional glimpse of what he thought might be the mountains before him, but he could not be sure. The weather was still cool, and there was often cloud cover. He had also noticed a subtle shift in the area, with the area of wind taking a stronger prominence. He would occasionally look back at the Taranu forest vanishing in the distance behind him. This kept on in much the same manner until the fourth day since he set out. Around midday, Valinar saw a glimpse of a small black speck in the distance moving in his general direction. When at last the slow rise and fall of the plains brought it in view again, they were close enough for Valinar to tell that it was a man, dressed in dark gray, arrayed for traveling and walking towards him. The man seemed to notice Valinar as well and changed his course so that he and the elf would encounter each other. When they finally did meet, it was the man who spoke first. An elf traveling beyond his home, said the man in mild and Valinar thought feigned surprise. Now that is a rare thing. Where are you bound? Perhaps I can help you reach your destination. Elf and man were within 10 paces each other and both stopped facing one another. The elf responded, My course leads me towards Fetra, and where are you bound, human? The man smiled and said, Petra, an interesting city. You will surely find some strange things within its walls, although perhaps not what you seek. Strange for a forest elf, that is. What is your errand there? For myself, I am simply out in the plains looking for someone. Valinar surveyed the man carefully. I appreciate your offer of help, but my business there is my own. What does this person look like? If I see him, I will tell him that you are looking. What is your name should I run into the one you seek? The man responded, Don't trouble yourself trying to find him. I think I shall head back to Fetra myself. Would you mind if I joined you? Walking the plains is such lonely work. I am called Utar, by the way. What is your name? Valinar was extremely uneasy about the man because the man in his garb reminded him strongly of a vision he had had 5 nights previously, which he could hardly recall, although something kept him watching the man's hands. I am called Valinar, and you may travel with me if you wish, although I intend to travel at speed and do not have time to delay if you cannot keep up. Valinar, good, said Utar as his smile vanished. I hoped I would be so lucky as to run into you. Ushara warned you might be setting out from Tiranu sooner rather than later, and my brethren and I were ordered to wait and search in preparation for such an occurrence. With surprising speed, he drew a black knife from his belt and stabbed at Valinar's chest. Warned by his vision and watching Utar's hands, he blocked the knife with his left arm, and with his right arm drew the Selkir from his back. The knife shattered upon the arm guard, and with surprise he jumped back beyond the reach of the sword. Recovering himself, Utar drew his own sword, which had a blade as black as the knife. Utar grinned with enjoyment and said, You are a quick one, elf, but are you any good with that weapon? I am known as quite a swordsman myself. Valinar's face was grim as he responded, What are you and why do you seek me out? Still smiling, the man responded, I seek you because you are a threat to the Union and to the Prophetess, and the Grey Order's plans for this terror. I am your Dathkar, last of the Highborn. Endbringer, he said, an appropriate name for an assassin. Utar nodded and, still grinning, lunged forward to attack Valinar. The man was indeed skilled with a blade, but also he was not expecting the speed or reflexes that the elf displayed as Valinar blocked or dodged every slash or blow that Utar aimed at him. The elf ended Utar's initial onslaught by parrying a swiping blow aimed at his right shoulder, switching the Selkir to his left hand, spinning around on his left foot, and bringing his right arm guard across the man's face. The blow knocked the man backward several paces, tore up the right side of his face, and wiped the grin off it. The man gave a howl of pain and raged and lunged at Valinar. After several wild blows, the elf sidestepped a particularly vicious stab, caught the man's sword arm, and stabbed his Selkir at the man's chest. The elvish blade passed easily through the leather armor the man wore and pierced his heart. As Valinar withdrew his weapon, the man gave a gasp, dropped his sword, and crumpled to the ground, where he gasped out his final breath. Valinar carefully cleaned the man's blood off his sword before returning it to its sheath. He then moved towards the man to see if he had anything of interest on him. At close inspection, the blade of the sword turned out to be poisoned. which led Valinar to quickly check to make sure that he had not been cut without realizing it. The man had nothing of value on him and only a small amount of food, which Valinar took to mean that the man must have had a camp in the area and was patrolling the area looking for him. Valinar quickened his pace towards Fetra with the hope of reaching the city before the assassin he had just killed was missed by anyone. Valinar was troubled because he knew that as soon as Utar was missing or his body was found, Ushar and her followers would know that he had left the forest. The man had been skilled, if overconfident, and it was only Valinar's speed and reflexes, and the man's own impatience which had saved him. If the opportunity ever presented himself, he decided that he really needed to practice his sword fighting. He was thankful that he had not needed to use his power to win the fight, for he had resolved before he left Tirana to avoid using any more magic than was vitally necessary to avoid attracting attention. And he feared that sooner or later he would meet a more skilled and more patient opponent who would be able to best him. Valinar began to see Fetra in the distance late the following day. The city was built around what looked like a fort which sat atop a particularly high hill and spread out some distance around it. Much of the city was made of stone or brick of much the same color as the plain, and even at a distance, Valinar could see a decent amount of foot and horse traffic along the various roads which led away from the city to the surrounding villages and beyond. He was quite close to the city when he stopped to sleep in a small but steep cleft in the terrain shortly after nightfall. He awoke before dawn and reached the city at sunrise the following morning. Valinar approached the southeast gate of Fetra and, with his hood drawn about his face, joined the steady stream of people heading into the city from the outlying houses and farms. He was surprised when he saw that the gate guards at the gate were arrayed in the livery of the Union. They did not stop him. In fact, if they made any special notice of him at all, they did not show it. Early as it was, there was already a large number of people out in the streets. A few merchants and traders looked up and stared for a moment at the tall stranger that had wandered through town. But with their focus on getting their stalls and storefronts ready, their interest was brief. Most did not notice him at all. Valinar spent several hours wandering around the twisted streets, taking a few moments here and there to peruse various shops and stalls to avoid attracting attention, listening where he could. He had managed to learn several things during his observation. Firstly, multiple troops of about half a dozen Union soldiers were patrolling the city, occasionally stopping people to question them, and twice dragging the questioned person off after a heated exchange of words. Second, there were no soldiers, as far as he could see, in the livery of Camral, strange for a society which was reported to Valinar to be heavily based around its military even in times of peace. Third, the yellow eye and clasped hands on purple of the Union was being flown from the fortress above the red falcon flying on green of Camral. Finally, from the looks of disapproval and shock from those who appeared to be from the more distant settlements when the Union patrols walked past, Valinar guessed that their presence was both recent and unwelcomed. Valinar tried asking several people about the presence of the Union soldiers, but people simply gave him either angry or fearful looks and hurried away muttering excuses. After attempting to ask questions for a good hour, he came to the conclusion that people thought him either in league with the Union and sent to trap them, or was a rabble rouser out to cause trouble. He hadn't figured it would be easy to get information, especially with so many Union soldiers wandering about, but he was still in good spirits since the signs of discontent with the Union, or at least its actions, was so apparent. Valinar decided to restrict himself for the rest of the day to listening and watching carefully to see if he could spot anyone who might give him more information. Nothing presented itself for several hours, and Valinar was beginning to contemplate whether to leave the city for the evening or find somewhere in town to sleep, when he rounded a quiet corner and saw in the distance a group of Union soldiers questioning a dwarf. "I'm not going to ask you again, dwarf," said what seemed to be the leader of the guards. "What are you doing in the streets armed?" The dwarf looked extremely annoyed at the harried questioning he was receiving. "I told you, I'm not a member of your union or Camral, and I'm not bound by your laws. I am a trader from the Graphic Dwarves in the Orthrus Mountains." The guard leader smirked and inquired further, "If you are not a citizen of Camral, what are you doing entering Fetra armed? That could be considered a hostile act." The dwarf grunted in annoyance. It has never been a problem in the past. I come here out often, but this is the first time I've ever been stopped, and I assure you, every time I have come here, I have been armed. It is custom for the dwarves of the Orthrus Mountains to go armed beyond our borders. Surely you must know that, as do most sensitive folks. The road is not without its dangers, and having a means of defending oneself is prudence. Well, things have changed in Fetra, dwarf. Kemral is part of the Union now, and no one but our soldiers are allowed to carry weapons, said a guard who had not spoken before. Bet that went over well with the citizens of Kamral, muttered the dwarf under his breath before saying aloud, I was unaware that Kamral had joined the Union. It had not done so when I was here a few months ago, and I had not had any news in the mountains. You said you were a trader. What are the items you trade? You have no wares on you, asked a third guard. I am a trader in weapons. I came to meet with the commander of the garrison to see if he was in need of any new arms this year. The Graphic dwarves have provided weapons for the Fetra garrison for many years in exchange for grain. The still smirking league guard said to the dwarf, I had thought the relations between the Graphic dwarves and Camral were poorer currently. Some grave insult or another. The dwarf nodded in response. Indeed, the relations between our peoples have been tense of late, but I have long been welcomed in Fetra, and was even a friend of the old garrison commander. However, now that you have replaced her and do not seem to be interested in dwarvish weapons, I intend on returning to the mountains early tomorrow. You are correct. We do not need your weaponry, and leaving tomorrow would be a wise thing for you to do, said the guard captain. And if you return to Fetra, I recommend that you do not bring weapons into the city. With that, the guards left the dwarf and moved off down the street. The dwarf, scowling, walked off in the direction of Valinar, who addressed the dwarf as soon as he was close enough. I overheard your conversation with the guards, and I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions of my own. The dwarf looked up and studied his addresser for several moments before saying, puzzled, An elf? What is more a forest elf by your accent? Traveling? Now that is a thing unheard of. What purpose drove you to leave your forest home? Valinar responded, I left the forest to seek answers. There are strange things going on in the Terra, and I seek to find out what. There are certainly things going on, but what do you seek to find out? Fearing to be overheard, the elf looked around quickly and lowered his voice to a whisper. I have seen and heard strange tales of this union, and to begin with, and there are other things as well. The dwarf considered the elf again before responding. I may be able to answer some of your questions, but this is not a place for such a discussion. There's an inn nearby where I have often stayed. We can talk in more comfort and secrecy there. The elf assented to this suggestion, and they made their way through the streets to the inn, the Sword and Shield, in the northern quarter of Fetra. The landlord greeted the pair with a nod and only a brief look of puzzlement, and ushered them to a small table in the corner away from the general crowd, and brought them some food and water. The dwarf was around 4 feet in height, and like all of his people, was extremely broad-shouldered. He had brown hair and a brown beard, both flecked with gray, which came down to the middle of his chest and braided towards the end. He wore a short of dwarf steel rings with a gray tunic over it, fastened at the waist with a belt. He also wore thick leather leggings, boots, and gloves. He had a dark gray cloak fastened around his neck. In his belt he carried a double-bladed axe and a long knife. A traveling pack was on his back. He had small black eyes under thick eyebrows. May I inquire your name, sir? Inquired Valinar to start the conversation. I am Narthan, son of Rithak, and I am from the Graphic dwarves that live in the Orthrus Mountains, responded the dwarf. And what is your name, elf, who wanders so far from his home? I am Valinar, son of Theras, replied Valinar after a moment's thought, deciding he could trust the dwarf with his real name. As you guessed, my home is the Taranu Forest. Tell me, Valinar, why is it you would leave the protection of your forest to come seeking dangers in the wild world? Said the dwarf asked. For if you truly feel the Union is a threat, then you are taking on an enemy that is both great and grave. Valinar nodded. The Union has had little to do with us until their emissary or prophetess Ushara came with an offer and veiled threats to us. This meeting left me with concerns about their intention, and along with the other strange occurrences I mentioned, has led me to journey forth to inquire about their activities. Narthan nodded. I share your concerns. We have had few dealings with them, though Ushara visited us as well, and their emissaries have made occasional offers of trade or an aid, never specific. You said you had questions, ask away. I will give you what information as I can. What do you know of the Union? They began in the city of Telmar some decades ago. They fought a series of wars with the surrounding cities to form their union. I have never heard of Ushara's origins, but she has been the driving force, although never the leader of the union since the beginning, and she claims to be a seer. Their emissaries travel widely, but their goals for the last few years are unclear. Valinar nodded. That matches what I've been told, although I did not know that Cameral had joined the Union. Narthan tilted his head in agreement. That was quite a shock for us when the news reached the mountains. They traded heavily with the Union, but had been strongly opposed to joining. About a month ago, King Ertol III suddenly changed his mind and passed down a decree that all of Camral was now a member of the Union, and all citizens were bound to obey their decrees. I am told the citizens and army of Camral were upset about that, and there was talk about opposing them, but the army was ordered disbanded by the king himself, and Union soldiers were almost immediately stationed in every major population center and forbade the carrying of weapons on the streets by any not a member of their army. I was sent here to discover more about what was going on, see if we could benefit by supplying any resistance that may be forming. Luckily, I was able to get the information I needed and make contact with a few old friends that were soldiers of Camral, but now it looks like I'll have to leave quickly. Valinar looked grim on hearing the dwarves' tidings. It seems that I was right. For all their claims of benevolence, there is something underhanded and suspicious about their dealings. Perhaps, Narthan acknowledged, but you said that you have other information that make you question their motives. Yes, Valinar hesitated. I have become aware of an evil force active in the world, and after an encounter with Ishara, I believe that her and the Union are related. You say an evil as if you intend on doing more than just seeking information, observed Valinar. Valinar shrugged and held up his hands without comment. You were more ambitious than I first thought if you are thinking of challenging Ushara along with this union that she controls. Is Ushara then the evil which you speak of? I know not whether she is the primary motivator behind it or if she is simply its pawn, but nevertheless she is part of it, and her plans, whatever those may be, must be undone if possible. Do you know anything about this evil which you speak of, or how to stop it? Inquired Narthan, with considerable skepticism. Does anything support what you say? I know that the evil that is coming threatens all the people of Sirana, and all races will fall if they do not stand united against whatever is coming. Beyond undoing the plans of Ushara, I know not how to stop the evil itself. That is also why I am beyond the verge of the forest. I am seeking more information. Is it the goal of the Union to unite all peoples against a common threat? Asked the dwarf sharply. That is its stated goal, but it seems to force people to join whether they wish or not, or else destroy them. And Ushara has some ulterior motive for the unity she seeks. Think of their decrees. Individual armies of its members are disbanded, only Union soldiers are allowed to carry weapons, and they are quite belligerent to the other peoples of the Terra. There is something more to their plans than simple unity. Narthan nodded at this, but was still suspicious. I see what you mean. They certainly seem to be trying to ensure that there is no resistance. How did you find all this out? Valinar thought for a moment and then responded. I was first made curious by the malevolent force that has been lying below the threads of Ere for some years now and has slowly been growing. I also have the gift of seeing what may be, and I have seen horrible disaster for all. As I mentioned, I met Ushara, and she made it quite clear to me that she was planning something. The dwarf pondered on this for a few moments before addressing Valinar again. Interesting. You are certainly fortunate that Ushara seems to have been open in your presence. Tell me, though, what is Ere? I have little dealings with elves, and I am sure of what you referred to. By ere, I mean the elemental force which is the basis and power behind all magic. Its threads can be found anywhere by any that are attuned to its presence as the elves are. Ah, I know of what you speak now. We dwarves call it grat. I myself have some skill in the weaving of the magics. I believe humans refer to it simply as the power or the elements. Now that I know that it is what you are referring to, I have a greater understanding of what you are saying. Okay, pages stuck together. You are capable of magic, said Valinar. I have had a few meetings with dwarves, but I was unaware that any of your race were capable of magic. Indeed I am, responded Narthan. In fact, many dwarves are capable of spell weaving, but few outsiders witness our doing so, for we employ our magic largely in the realms of mining, construction, and forgecraft. That type of magic is one that is hard to spot even by the trained eye. We do employ other forms of magic when the need arises, such as in battle. I know of the feeling of hatred which you speak of. It is faint and distant, and I have encountered it rarely, but it is definitely there. I had thought little of it before now, but what you say does make sense. Do you believe me then? Narthan thought for a moment. You have given some compelling evidence that there is something else going on, but how did you connect those things together to be so certain that Ushara and the Union mean evil to all? Valinar paused for a moment, but decided that he had given so much already that he might as well give the rest. Much of my information comes from an encounter that I had with the spirit of a long dead elf who was bonded to the Earth Ere. I was suspicious from my meeting with Ushara and the strange evil feeling in the Ere, but he filled in the gaps and sent me forth to not only gain information but to stop the threat if I can. Narthan looked skeptical again. You certainly tell an interesting tale, Valinar. I have never heard of anything like that spirit you speak of in all the tales and legends of my people. And you certainly have your work cut out for you if you really mean to take the Union on. Valinar nodded an understanding, but as he went to speak, the door of the tavern swung open and half a dozen Union guards walked in. They were moving towards the bar when the guard leader glanced to his left and noticed the elf and dwarf at their table. He made his way over with his guards following. What do we have here? Said the guard leader. A dwarf and an elf armed in defiance of the law? I am afraid that both of you are going to have to come with us. We shall have to finish this conversation some other time, muttered Valinar to Narthan. He then stood up, taller than the guards by several inches, and addressed their leader. I have no intention on going anywhere with you, and I believe that my dwarven companion is of the same opinion. Narthan nodded in assent and also rose to his feet. That I am indeed. We are not your subjects, so why not just have a drink and leave us to our meal? The guard leader scowled and put his hand on the hilt of his sword at his waist and said threatening, Oh, you are coming with us, for we have been ordered to look for an elf in the city. It is a stroke of luck that we happened upon you so quickly. And you, dwarf, will need to be questioned about your involvement with this elf. If you will not go willingly, you will go by force. With that, he took a step toward Valinar. Valinar, without hesitation, punched the guard leader full in the face, which lifted the man off the ground and landed hard on his back. He then grabbed the pommel of the sword of the guard to the captain's left, was attempting to draw before punching the man in the stomach. As the man bent double, Valinar let go of the pommel and brought his hand down upon the man's back, slamming him to the floor. To Valinar's right, Narthan threw his body into the guard standing to his right, slamming him against the wall with enough force to cause the man to crumple to the floor after the dwarf moved away. The dwarf then grabbed the leg of the guard immediately in front of him and pulled, causing the man to come crashing to the floor. That guard attempted to rise and draw his sword, but in the act of rising, Narthan sent the man back to the floor with a blow across the face. The other two guards had drawn their swords at this point and lunged towards the elf and dwarf. Valinar caught the sword hand of his attacker and twisted the blade from it, and incapacitated the man with a blow to the chest. Narthan sidestepped the strike, disarmed the man with a blow to his hands, and knocked the man unconscious with successive blows to the stomach and the head. There was a brief pause, and then a ragged cheer rose from the other patrons on seeing the Union guards beaten so handily. Valinar and Narthan did not wait to see if the guards were going to recover and raise the alarm. They quickly paid for their meal, gathered their packs, and left. They made their way through a number of alleys until they were a decent distance away from the tavern before they stopped to talk. Narthan said, somewhat amused, "They aren't very good, are they? Or at least they were not expecting us to fight back." Valinar laughed. "Perhaps undoing them will not be so difficult." Narthan smiled but responded grimly, "Oh, I suspect the Union's soldiers and guards are not so poorly trained. Even if that were so, what you have for yourself will not be easy. Their army is large and well organized if they were able to get troops here so quickly. It would take a full revolt and probably outside aid as well to even drive them back to their own lands. It sounds as if Kemeral is unhappy with the new arrangement and would revolt if the situation was right. But before that can happen, you need to find out why they joined in the first place. Fetra is too far from the heart of Kemeral to raise an effective revolt anyway. For now, we must get out of this city, as they are likely already looking for us." "Well, aren't you cheery?" chuckled Valinar. "But you are right. We cannot stand around here talking." Narthan said, "We can slip out of the gates easily enough. All the gates are left open until nightfall, and at this time of the evening many villagers are returning to their homes. We are near the North Gate, which is where my path lies back to my tribe in the Orthrus Mountains. What is your destination?" "Orthrus is likewise my destination," responded Valinar. "It is my intention to conduct my search for information and allies in all the realms of Sirana. The Orthrus Mountains are also the likely home of the Lady of Fire, an area-bound spirit like the Earth Spirit I spoke of. She will have information that I would need." "I will help you as I am able, Valinar," said Narthan. "Your story is a strange one, but for a long time I have felt that there is something wrong with the Terra as well. I will take you before Lord Irtla of the Graphic Dwarves, and he may be able to give you information. May be able to give you information. There is also a large tribe of goblins living in the mountains, although the relations between dwarf and goblin are edging on war. You may be able to persuade them to part with information, but they are manipulative, and I doubt you will get any aid from them without giving something in return. As to where there being a Lady of Fire in the mountains, I know nothing. Before I met you, I had never heard of such a thing as a spirit bonded to Grat before." "I would be thankful for any help that you could provide," Narthan said Valinar as Elf and Dwarf began moving towards the north gate of Fetra. "I will be deeply in your debt for providing such aid to me. I am curious to know more about the relations between dwarf and goblin. It may also be a symptom of that strange hatred." Narthan smiled. "Our peoples have always competed with each other, going back as far as our records go. The evil which is there may play a role, but I am not sure that knowledge would do what that knowledge would do to help the situation. There will be time there will be time to give this situation later. Now we must be silent and draw our hoods over our faces, for we are coming to the gates, and we do not wish the guards to see us." Valinar nodded an assent to this, and like Narthan drew his hood up over his face and hurried past the guards and out through the north gate of Fetra. The mountains appeared close now, but it would still take 8 days to reach them, according to Narthan. So elf and dwarf set out towards the distant snow-covered peaks at a brisk pace, with the hope of putting some distance between themselves and Fetra before the guards realized where they had gone. Even when they were sure that no one had followed them out of the city, they kept their pace up as the sun sank slowly below the horizon. And that is the end of chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to hear your comments, both on the content of the chapter as well as my reading or anything else like that. I would also love for you to check out my book. Link of where to buy it or read it on Kindle Unlimited is below. That is The Shadow of the Past. There's also my second book, And the Sunburn Red, also available and linked below, as are my socials. Please like, share, subscribe, comments. I would love to hear from you and what you think and any other suggestions you might have. But for the moment, I do hope you all have a wonderful day. You get a chance to do or experience something creative, and I will catch you on the next one.